that. So that's my background. Is basically everyone knows what Nero is. If you don't know Nero, it's New England Role Playing Organization, one of the first major large boffer games.
My name is John Bacon. I've been LARPing since 1986
Yes.
for Nero. The only difference is right now I'm not currently running anything. So,
You know, we have an alliance chapter up in Connecticut.
yeah, a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old.
Oh, where are you? Okay. Yeah.
It's time to introduce him to
I've played everything from 2-hour-long, 1-hour-long, ILF style LARPs, all the way through very hardcore boffer, including completely week-long events. So I think last time I lost track, it was around over 200 events I've played and ran about 90. So.
My name is Mark Wax. Everyone knows me as Justin. I've been doing LARP since about '87, more or less exclusively IL style LARP. So you know it's sort of we've got the Nero side of the table there, and the theater style over here.
I do everything. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we'll get into the well, that's true. We'll get into the differences, I think, in a minute.
You can't go both ways.
Yes. No, yeah, except that you can. And I've also been doing SCA, which is similar, although not the same thing, for about 24 years, and we may get into the question of is the SCA a LARP or not, which is one of those things that Mike and I wind up talking about every time we do this panel together.
Whenever I tell an SCA person they're a LARP, they hit me with big weapons.
Yeah, well,
Yes, and they're not hitting you because I don't have my weapon.
Yes.
Big weapon made of
SCA is not a LARP.
Hi, I'm Chad Bergeron. I'm a little newer to the LARP scene than these folks here. I've only been actively involved in the LARP scene since 1995. I'm on the board of New England Interactive Literature, an organization which puts on a lot of the IL events in the area, notably the Intercon event, which takes place in Chelmsford every year. And that is an all-IL convention happening at the end of February this year. If you're really interested, we can go into that some, but I don't want to proselytize too much here. So I've helped to run a large number of events, both as a con organizer and as a game writer and runner. And I've also played an awful lot of things and have tried to keep my finger a little bit on what's going on around LARP in the New England area, all forms of LARP in the New England area, and I really look forward to having all the different viewpoints here today. So.
Hi, my name is Anna Bradley. I've been LARPing since 96, 97, something like that. I do both IL, interactive literature, theater style game, and boffer games, and airsoft games. I both play them and write them, both in the New England community and the Baltimore and Washington community. And like Chad, I am heavily involved with both NEIL, New England Interactive Literature, and the Intercon convention that's every year in March.
So there may be people out in this audience that don't quite know what LARP is, and the LARP itself is an acronym that usually stands for Live Action Role Playing. Occasionally I've heard a few other words described to those letters, but that's the basics. But from there, it really can branch off into a lot of different definitions of what is LARP. And so you may have heard us during our intro here talking about different terms like boffer, IL, theater style, live combat, and let's go ahead and talk about some of the ideas. What defines LARP for you, Mike?
LARP is playing make-believe as an adult. We all get together and we have a story and we tell a story pretty much. You know, we play the parts. Instead of watching it, you're actually being part of it. And there's so many different varieties of it that it's really hard to classify. That's why we're saying just about anything could be a LARP. The key here is that you don't sit around a table and roll dice or play cards. You know, you actually go out and try to make it as realistically as you can given your budget and your time and real life, things. So to me, that's the difference, going that extra step beyond the tabletop and such. And to me, it's the obvious next step you take when you're going to play games. And when I try to explain it to people who play computer games, who are really into the computer games or are really into their Magic, gathering, I say, look, take it the next step. Don't just sit around the table playing Dungeons and Dragons. This is what comes next. And I'm always surprised by people who go, oh, that seems geeky. I'm going, that's geeky.
Yeah, because the computer game isn't.
I'm out in the woods getting exercise and dealing with real people who are three-dimensional, and you think it's geeky and you're sitting in front of a computer screen?
Geeks rock.
It's
Scars are my things. Try to say that.
You get scarred in LARPs. That is awesome. I got this from an elf maid.
So,
Who else can say that? Who else can say that and mean
Go
it?
for it.
There's a fairly large spectrum in the question of what is LARP. Like I said, I mostly come from the IL tradition, interactive literature, which is a tradition that more or less grew out of Harvard in the early 80s. The IL stuff, the principal differences are that it usually isn't live combat.
You don't get to hit anyone.
Well, that's true. The game
So depends on who you are.
yes, that's true. It has a tendency to be a little bit more focused on frankly political games and things like that. They tend to be talkier games. There is generally less combat because the combat is simulated in a more simulated kind of way. The games tend to be very, very highly written in general. They usually have a very definite story happening in a very definite time frame, and we can talk about that a little bit more later.
Question.
For someone who's played Dungeons and Dragons but not LARP, when you say very heavily written, is there like a dungeon master, or do they make you a script, or?
So almost any LARP has a game master of some sort, or multiple game masters. Frequently, many game masters, depending on the size of it. I don't know how many GMs do you have for the Nero events?
We have a plot committee that pretty much oversees it, and each person on the plot committee has their specific plot. And there'll be one person who's responsible for the main plot of the weekend, but there's overlying plots that run underneath it. There'll be a specific plot person whose job is to write plot for the elves or something like that. And so there's lots.
Yeah,
you want there to be, even the LARP games. People think sometimes the LARP games you just go out and hit each other all weekend long, and it's one battle after another. But there's tons of plot lines
You'd
going
be
on.
shocked.
Right.
I mean,
So you
we've
need
had-
tons of plot writers.
Right. We've had, we ran what, 520 people once?
Oh,
That's big.
And we had about 80 staff.
Right.
About 80 staff, and that was dedicated staff. That didn't include also
Oh,
just
NPCs,
NPCs.
yeah.
Who were out just playing the bit parts, things like that.
I think we could probably agree that any game without plot is just an exercise.
yes.
Yeah.
It's what we call a LAS, just live action playing.
Yeah, the whole idea is
Practice. We
storytelling.
called it practice. Usually
Yeah, and I
fight
know-
practice.
Actually, I mean, let's be fair here. I mean, some of the games that come out of the European tradition, I gather, are very, very GM light. They really are much more exercises in pure make believe, and they have a tendency to have little or no GM intervention. Most of the games that are done by the people up here do have a substantial amount of GM staff. I have a few times run games with only me as the GM. Usually you've got at least a few GMs, and sometimes in some games you'll get as many as a 4-to-1 ratio of players to GMs.
Let me add to this too that in the one-shot games, obviously there's a lot of writing, and you as the player don't have as much control as you would in a long-shot game. Like the live-action games that we run, the buffer type games tend to run. The plot line continues obviously from event to event to event to event.
Year from year
And
to
so
year
what
to year.
happens is, yes, and from year to year, you've got plot lines that can last actual years, and players can go off on their own and do their own, make their own little alliances and things. The next thing you know, we on the plot committee are shocked at where it's going. We have no idea what's happening next.
Yeah,
Don't think it's
looking at a role-playing
about
comparison
friends
there.
here.
Yeah, looking at a role-playing comparison there, the one-shots that you mentioned might be like a module where a GM just
Yes.
picks up something pre-printed, pre-published,